First contact through polarized glass. Lieutenant Ariadne Moonwhisper stood frozen behind the safety of her ship's polarized viewing window. Her large, pointed ears twitched slightly as she watched the impossible scene unfolding before her. A human spacewalker floated freely in the harsh sunlight, wearing what appeared to be a laughably thin protective suit by her people's standards. "That can't be right," she muttered, her silver eyes widening. "Run another radiation scan." The ship's computer beeped softly. "Confirmed. Solar radiation levels are at standard intensity." The human shows no signs of distress. Ariadne's pale, almost translucent skin seemed to shimmer with anxiety under the ship's soft lighting. Like all her people from the twilight world of Alfheim, she required extensive protection from any direct stellar radiation. Their entire civilization had developed in the narrow habitable band of their tidally locked planet, where eternal dusk provided just enough light to survive, while shielding them from the harsh rays of their sun. The human continued their maintenance work on their ship's communication array, occasionally pausing to wave at the elf vessel. Their movements were casual, almost lazy, as if working in the deadly vacuum of space, under direct sunlight, was no more concerning than a peaceful afternoon stroll. "Captain," Ariadne called out, her voice carrying a mix of disbelief and excitement. "You need to see this." Captain Silveria Starweaver glided across the bridge, her long silver hair floating gracefully in the low gravity. Even inside their heavily shielded vessel, she wore the traditional protective garments of their people, layers of treated fabric that filtered out harmful radiation. "By the eternal twilight," the captain whispered, watching the human work. "How are they surviving out there? Their protection seems minimal at best." Ariadne quickly pulled up the biological scans on her holographic display. "That's just it, Captain. They appear to have natural resistance to solar radiation. Their skin contains some kind of protective pigmentation, and their DNA shows signs of advanced repair mechanisms for radiation damage." More human ships appeared on their long-range sensors, approaching with careful precision. Each vessel bristled with solar panels and external equipment, all designed to work in direct sunlight. It went against everything the elves understood about civilized space travel. "Captain," Ariadne said, trying to keep her voice steady, "request permission to establish a research team. These humans, they're extraordinary. They've evolved in ways we never imagined possible. Think of what we could learn from them." Captain Silveria studied the approaching fleet thoughtfully. "Granted, Lieutenant, but remember our protocols. We can't risk exposure, no matter how fascinating these creatures are." The human spacewalker finally finished their work and turned to face the elf ship directly. They raised both hands in what appeared to be a universal gesture of peaceful greeting. The simple action sent shivers down Ariadne's spine. Here was a being who could do something her people had dreamed of for generations: exist in starlight without fear. "Initiating first contact protocols," the captain announced. "Lieutenant Moonwhisper, since you're so interested in our sun-resistant friends, you'll be leading the diplomatic science team." Ariadne couldn't suppress her smile as she watched more humans emerge from their ships, moving through space as if they owned it. Something told her this encounter would change everything her people thought they knew about life among the stars. The eternal twilight of home suddenly seemed very far away indeed. The ambassador's daughter. Ariadne stepped out of the transport pod onto Earth soil for the first time, her protective suit humming softly as it filtered the morning sunlight. She felt like a deep-sea diver exploring an alien world, which in many ways she was. The spaceport around her buzzed with activity as humans moved freely under the open sky, their bare skin exposed to the sun's rays. Lieutenant Moonwhisper, a tall human male, approached her, his dark hair neatly combed and his brown eyes showing warmth. "I'm Jake Chen, your diplomatic liaison. Welcome to Earth." Ariadne's silver eyes blinked behind her protective visor as she studied him. His skin had a healthy tan that seemed to mock everything she knew about radiation protection. "Thank you," she said, her voice slightly distorted through the suit's speakers. "I must look quite strange to you." Jake smiled, shaking his head. No stranger than I must look to you, walking around unprotected like this. He gestured at his simple business suit. Would you like to see the city? The transport ride into New Shanghai was both terrifying and fascinating. Ariadne pressed herself against the vehicle's UV-filtered windows, watching in amazement as millions of humans went about their daily lives under the brutal glare of their sun. Children played in parks, elderly couples walked their pets, and workers ate lunch at outdoor cafes. "How do you stand it?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "All that radiation beating down on you constantly." Jake leaned back in his seat, considering her question. "How do you stand living in eternal twilight?" He countered gently. "It's all about what you evolve with, isn't it? Our bodies adapted to handle sunlight over millions of years." The car passed a group of teenagers playing basketball in a sun-drenched court. Their exposed arms and legs showed various shades of melanin, from pale to dark brown. "Your people come in different colors," Ariadne observed. "Is that related to your sun resistance?" "Exactly." Jake's face lit up. "Different amounts of melanin. That's the pigment that protects us from the sun. Our ancestors developed different levels depending on where they lived and how much sun exposure they got." They arrived at the diplomatic housing complex, a beautiful building with specially designed windows that could filter out 99.9% of harmful radiation. As they walked through the lobby, Ariadne noticed other alien diplomats, but none wore protection as extensive as hers. "Your quarters have been modified to match twilight conditions," Jake explained, leading her to her new home. "You can safely remove your suit inside." Once inside, Ariadne began the careful process of removing her protective gear. Jake politely turned away as she emerged, her silvery white skin almost glowing in the dim light. Without the suit's barrier, she felt oddly vulnerable. "Better?" Jake asked, still facing away. "Yes," she replied, pulling on a lighter indoor protective garment. "You can turn around now." When he did, his eyes widened slightly. Ariadne knew what he saw: her ethereal appearance, characteristic of her people. Pale skin that seemed to shimmer, long platinum hair that caught even the faintest light, and those distinctive pointed ears. "Now who's staring?" she teased, surprising herself with her boldness. Jake laughed, a pleasant sound that made her feel more at ease. "Sorry. It's just, you look like you stepped out of our fairy tales. The good ones," he added quickly. Looking out her safely filtered window at the sunlit city below, Ariadne felt a mix of fear and excitement. "I have so much to learn about your world, Jake Chen." "And I about yours, Lieutenant Moonwhisper." He smiled again, and Ariadne noticed how the dim light caught his eyes. "This is going to be an interesting assignment for both of us." She nodded, watching a flock of birds soar freely through the sunny sky. "Interesting indeed. Children of different stars. This is called a beach." Ariadne pressed her hands against the thick, UV-filtered glass of the observation room. Below, hundreds of humans splashed in the ocean waves and lounged on the white sand under the bright midday sun. Jake sat beside her, sipping a cold drink. "Best place to understand how humans interact with sunlight," he explained. "Watch those kids over there." Ariadne followed his gesture to a group of children building sandcastles. Their parents sat nearby, occasionally calling out to apply more sunscreen to their children's already tanned skin. "What are they putting on them?" she asked, fascinated by the ritual. "Sunscreen. Even though we're resistant to sunlight, too much exposure can still harm us. Our bodies produce melanin for protection, but we help it along." Jake pulled out a bottle of sunscreen. "Want to see?" Ariadne took the bottle carefully, reading the label through her protective visor. SPF 50. What does that mean? Sun protection factor. It blocks harmful radiation. Jake chuckled. "Though I guess compared to your suit, SPF 50 must seem like nothing." A young girl on the beach caught Ariadne's attention. Her skin was much darker than Jake's, and she moved confidently under the bright sun. "Why is her protection different?" "That's natural melanin," Jake explained. Humans whose ancestors lived in sunnier regions developed more melanin over thousands of generations. It's one of the ways Earth's humans adapted to different environments. Ariadne thought about her own people, living in the eternal twilight zone of Alfheim. We never had the chance to adapt like that. Our sun, it's much stronger than yours. The bright side of our planet is a scorched wasteland. The dark side is frozen. We could only survive in the thin band between. But look what that led to, Jake said softly. Your people developed amazing technology. Those protective suits, your UV filtering, we could learn a lot from each other. A family walked past their observation window, the parent holding hands while their children ran ahead, all of them wearing only light clothing and hats. Ariadne tried to imagine her own people doing that, walking freely under open sky. Tell me about your world, Jake said, turning to face her. What's it like living in twilight? Ariadne's silver eyes grew distant with memory. The sky is always purple-orange, like what you call sunset, but it never changes. Our cities are built with crystal spires that capture and filter the light. Everything glows softly. No harsh shadows, no bright glare. Just perfect twilight. Sounds beautiful, Jake murmured. It is, but she hesitated, watching a child splash joyfully in the waves. Sometimes I wonder what we've missed, hiding from the light. Your people build cities in deserts, farm under open skies, swim in seas touched by sunlight. We've achieved so much, but we're still trapped by our star's radiation. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. Maybe that's why our peoples met, he suggested. You have the technology, we have the biological adaptations. Together we could reach further than either of us could alone. Ariadne finished, her eyes shining with possibility. A group of children ran past, leaving wet footprints on the sand. They were different shades and colors, but all played together under the same sun. Ariadne watched them, understanding something profound about humanity's strength. Your children, she said softly, they're born into a world where they can touch sunlight. They grow up knowing the stars are within reach. Jake nodded, watching her face as she studied the scene below. Maybe someday your children will know that feeling too. Ariadne smiled behind her visor. Children of different stars, she mused, learning from each other. On the beach below, the sun continued to shine, warming human skin that had evolved over millions of years to welcome its touch, while behind protective glass, an elf girl dreamed of feeling its warmth herself someday. The solar crisis. The emergency alarms blared through Earth's orbital command center. Ariadne watched in horror as the massive solar flare erupted from the sun's surface, its deadly radiation rushing toward Earth like a tidal wave of fire. Time to impact, Jake demanded, standing beside her at the control center. 17 minutes, a technician responded calmly. Standard flare protocols are already active. Earth's magnetic field will handle most of it. But Ariadne wasn't worried about Earth. Her eyes were fixed on the orbital display showing the elf diplomatic fleet. Their ships, despite their advanced technology, weren't designed to handle this level of radiation. Our shields won't hold, she whispered, her voice shaking. Our ships, our people. Jake grabbed her shoulder. How many of your people are up there? 327, she answered automatically. Our shields are meant for constant, low-level radiation. Not this. The humans around her burst into action. Jake rushed to the main communication panel. This is Earth Command to all vessels. We have a Level 9 solar event incoming. Human ships, activate your flare protocols. Elf vessels, prepare for immediate emergency docking. Ariadne stared at him. Docking? Where? The International Space Station, Jake said, pointing to a massive structure on the display. It's got the strongest radiation shielding we've ever built. We had to, after the solar storm of 2039. The elf ships were already moving, their elegant designs gleaming as they rushed toward the space station. On another screen, Ariadne could see human ships deploying massive solar shields, positioning themselves to protect the evacuating elf vessels. 10 minutes to impact, the technician announced. The station can't hold all our ships, Ariadne said, doing quick calculations. There's not enough time. Jake was already typing commands. No, but our lunar base can hold the rest. Captain Starweaver, redirect your secondary fleet to Luna Station. We'll coordinate from here. Ariadne watched in amazement as humans and elves worked together with practiced efficiency. Human ships guided elf vessels into docking positions, their crews working in the dangerous sunlight to secure the connections. 5 minutes. Third Fleet still exposed. Someone called out. They won't make it to Luna in time. Ariadne felt her heart stop, but then she saw Jake smile. No, they won't. But they don't have to. He hit the broadcast button. Third Fleet, kill your engines. Earth Defense Force, move to Shield Formation Delta. To Ariadne's astonishment, 12 human ships moved into position around the remaining elf vessels, linking their shield systems together to create a protective bubble. 1 minute. The solar flare hit like a hammer of light. Ariadne had to look away from the screens as radiation levels spiked beyond anything she'd ever seen. For 30 terrifying seconds, no one spoke. Then, one by one, the status reports came in. ISS secure. All docked ships protected. Luna Station reports successful emergency docking. Shield Formation Delta holding. Elf ships unharmed. Ariadne realized she was crying inside her protective suit. Not a single ship lost. Not one life sacrificed. She turned to Jake, who was still monitoring the situation. You saved them, she said softly. You all risked your lives. Jake shook his head. We did what anyone would do. Besides, he smiled at her. Your ships helped too. Their sensor data gave us the warning we needed. We're stronger together. As the crisis passed and the cleanup began, Ariadne watched humans and elves working side by side in space, sharing knowledge and protection. Their differences didn't matter in the face of danger. All that mattered was saving lives. Maybe, she thought, watching a human crew help repair an elf ship's radiation shield. This is how great alliances begin. Breaking the shade barrier. The laboratory was silent except for the soft hum of equipment and the gentle tapping of Ariadne's fingers on her holographic display. She had spent the last 3 months working with Earth's top geneticists, studying the differences between human and elf DNA. Look at this, she said to Jake, who had brought her dinner for the 3rd time this week. She pointed to a complex genetic sequence floating in the air. Human DNA has these repair mechanisms that activate when radiation damages cells. We have something similar, but much weaker. Jake set down the food container and leaned closer, pretending to understand the complicated display. Can you enhance it? That's what we're trying to do. Ariadne pulled up another hologram, showing elf DNA structure. We've identified the genes responsible for radiation resistance in humans. If we can modify our own genetic code to match. She stopped suddenly, remembering the last failed test. The lab mice they'd modified had shown improved radiation resistance, but their skin had become unstable, turning various unnatural colors before the changes reversed themselves. Hey, Jake said softly, noticing her expression. You'll figure it out. You always do. Ariadne turned to look at him, her silver eyes tired but determined. It's not just about the science anymore, Jake. Yesterday, I watched you have lunch in the park. Such a simple thing, but she pressed her hand against her protective suit. I want to know what that feels like. Jake reached out and touched her visor, the closest he could come to touching her face. You will. The next morning, Dr. Sarah Chen, Jake's sister and lead geneticist on the project, rushed into the lab. Ariadne, we found something. The elf scientist quickly scanned the new data. Her eyes widened. The crystalline proteins. Of course. Our bodies already produce them for low-light vision. If we modify them to respond to UV radiation instead, they worked nonstop for 2 weeks. Jake brought them meals and coffee, watching as the two scientists combined human and elf biological systems in ways never before attempted. The breakthrough came on a quiet Sunday morning. "It's ready," Ariadne announced, holding up a vial of silvery liquid. "The modified gene therapy is stable." Dr. Chen frowned. "We should run more tests. The simulations look good, but—" "I'll do it," Ariadne said firmly. "I volunteer." "No way." Jake stepped forward. "It's too dangerous." Ariadne removed her protective helmet, something she only did in specially shielded rooms. Her pale face was set with determination. "Our people have hidden from the light for too long. Someone has to take the first step." The treatment took 6 hours. Ariadne lay in a shielded medical pod as the modified genes were introduced to her system. Jake stayed by her side, watching the monitors anxiously. When she opened her eyes, everything looked different. Colors seemed sharper, clearer. She felt strange, but not uncomfortable. "How do you feel?" Dr. Chen asked, running a scanner over her. "Strong," Ariadne replied, surprised. She sat up, looking at her hands. Her skin seemed to have a slight iridescent quality now, barely noticeable except in direct light. "Your cellular structure is stable," Dr. Chen announced, smiling. "And your radiation resistance, it's at 40% of human baseline. Not perfect, but enough to go outside with minimal protection," Ariadne finished, her voice filled with wonder. She turned to Jake, who was grinning. "Take me outside." They walked to the lab's small courtyard. Ariadne wore only a light protective garment, far less bulky than her usual suit. At the door, she hesitated. Together, Jake offered his hand. Ariadne took it, and they stepped into the sunlight. Dawn's first light. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Ariadne stood on the rooftop garden of the research facility. She wore only the lightest protective clothing now, a thin silver bodysuit that sparkled in the morning light. Around her, a dozen other elf volunteers waited nervously for their first dawn. "Remember," Dr. Chen called out, checking her instruments, "your bodies will tell you if the exposure is too much. Don't push yourselves." Jake stood beside Ariadne, watching her skin shimmer with its new iridescent quality, a side effect of the treatment that no one had expected. Under sunlight, treated elves literally sparkled like living crystals. "Nervous?" he asked softly. "Terrified," Ariadne admitted with a small laugh, "but excited too. Our people have dreamed of this for generations." The first ray of direct sunlight touched her face. Ariadne gasped, not from pain, but from the sheer sensation of it. Warmth, real warmth, spread across her skin. Her enhanced cells activated instantly, creating a subtle rainbow shimmer wherever the light touched. Around her, other elves were having similar reactions. Some cried, others laughed, all of them experiencing direct sunlight for the first time in their species' history. Their shimmering skin created a dazzling light show as they moved. "This is—" Ariadne struggled to find words. "It's so warm." Jake squeezed her hand. "How does it feel? Any discomfort?" She shook her head, silver tears running down her sparkling cheeks. "It feels like being alive in a whole new way." Dr. Chen moved among the volunteers, taking readings. Cellular stability at 98%. Radiation resistance holding steady at 45% of human baseline. "It's working better than we hoped." One young elf scientist was spinning in circles, watching the light play off his skin. "We're like living prisms," he shouted joyfully. "The light. We're not just hiding from it anymore. We're part of it." News of the successful treatment spread quickly. Within hours, the research facility was flooded with calls from the elf fleet. More volunteers wanted to participate. More scientists wanted to help refine the process. But for Ariadne, the most important moment came later that day. She stood in the same park where she'd once watched Jake eat lunch, this time without her heavy protective suit. The sunlight filtered through the trees, creating patterns on her shimmering skin. "I never understood before," she said, turning to Jake. why humans built their cities in the open, why they loved the sun so much. But now, she spread her arms, letting the light play across them. Now I understand. It's not just about surviving in the light. It's about living in it. Jake watched her, smiling. You know, in our old stories, elves were always creatures of starlight and shadow. But look at you now. You're creatures of pure light. A group of human children ran past, stopping to stare in wonder at Ariadne's sparkling skin. Instead of hiding, she waved at them, and they waved back enthusiastically. Do all elves sparkle now? One little girl asked. Ariadne knelt down to her level. Only the ones who choose to. We're learning to live in the sun, just like you. It's pretty, the child decided before running off to join her friends. Jake helped Ariadne stand, both of them watching the children play. You've changed everything, he said quietly. Not just for your people, but for us too. You've shown us that even the most fundamental barriers can be overcome. Ariadne looked at her shimmering hands, then at the sun above. We're not finished yet, she said. This is just the dawn of something new. And in the warm sunlight of Earth, an elf woman sparkled like a living star, no longer afraid of the light. Children of all stars. The garden was filled with both sunlight and starlight. Floating crystal orbs, a gift from Alfheim, created patches of familiar twilight among the earth flowers. Under this mixed light, humans and elves gathered together, some sparkling with the gene treatment, others in light protective gear, and many simply as they were born. Ariadne stood before a mirror in her preparation room, watching her skin shimmer in the sunbeams that streamed through the window. Her wedding dress, designed by both human and elf craftsmen, combined flowing earth silk with protective Alfheim crystal threads that caught and scattered light like tiny stars. Ready? Captain Silveria asked, entering the room. The captain's own skin sparkled softly. She had taken the treatment 3 months ago. Almost can't believe we're here, Ariadne replied, touching the window's warm glass. 5 years ago, I couldn't even imagine standing in sunlight. The ceremony space had been carefully designed to accommodate both species. One half lay in direct sunlight, the other under the artificial twilight, with a beautiful meeting point in between where the lights mixed and danced together. Jake waited at the center point, wearing a suit embedded with tiny crystals that matched Ariadne's natural shimmer. Dr. Chen stood beside him as his best woman, beaming proudly at the success of their shared achievement. As Ariadne walked down the aisle, she passed rows of guests that told the story of how far both species had come. Human scientists sat next to elf engineers, their children playing together in the mixed light. Some elf guests sparkled like her, others wore their traditional protective gear, each choosing their own way to live among the stars. Today, the human-elf efficient began. We celebrate not just the union of two people, but the joining of two ways of living. Through love, science, and understanding, we have learned that differences need not divide us. Jake took Ariadne's hands, marveling as always at how her skin caught the sunlight. 5 years ago, he said, you asked me how we could stand living under constant sunlight. Now I ask you, how do you like it? Ariadne laughed, her silver eyes bright with joy. I love it almost as much as I love you. They exchanged rings made of earth gold and Alfheim crystal, each catching and reflecting light in their own unique way. As they sealed their union with a kiss, the assembled guests cheered in 2 languages. At the reception, children from both species played in the mixed light, their laughter bridging any remaining gaps between their peoples. Young elves showed off their sparkles to fascinated human kids, while human children taught their new friends Earth games. Look, Jake said softly, pointing to the horizon. A new type of ship was landing at the nearby spaceport, its design a brilliant fusion of human solar sail technology and elf crystal engineering. The first of the new joint fleet. Ariadne watched the ship land, remembering her first terrified view of humans working in sunlight. We've come so far, she said, not just in living under the sun, but in learning from each other. Speaking of learning, Jake grinned. Should we tell them our other news? Ariadne touched her stomach gently. Thanks to the same genetic science that had given her people the sun, she and Jake were expecting a child, the first natural human elf baby. Let them figure it out, she smiled. After all, discovery is what brought us together. As the celebration continued under Earth's setting sun, Ariadne looked at her shimmering skin, at her human husband, and at their gathered friends and family. They had done more than break down the barrier between their species. They had created something entirely new. Above them, the first stars began to appear as the sun sank lower, and in that perfect moment between day and night, two peoples who had evolved under different stars celebrated the endless possibilities that lay ahead.